The high-altitude air in Aspen, Colorado had always carried a certain crispness. But today, as Claire Monroe stood on the wraparound deck of her parents' chalet, the cold seemed to seep into her bones, no matter how tightly she wrapped her cardigan around her. Below, the dense pines swayed gently in the wind, but everything inside her was still and heavy. Inside, voices clashed behind the thick wooden doors. "Claire, you have to listen to reason," her father said, his tone low but strained. "I can't believe you're even suggesting this," Claire snapped as she pushed the door open. "You want me to marry a man in a coma?" Across the room, her mother crossed her arms over her cashmere shawl, her face unreadable. "Not just any man. Julian Carter, your sister's fiancé, the co-director of Carter Institute. If this project collapses, we lose the entire Monroe grant portfolio." Claire's gaze darted to the empty fireplace, avoiding their eyes. She had heard enough about the Institute, about the multi-million-dollar partnership between the Carter family and her sister's genetics startup, about the neurological therapy Julian and Hannah were co-developing, and about how a single signature could preserve it all. Then why don't you wait for Hannah to wake up and deal with it herself? Claire's voice cracked, despite her effort to keep it firm. Her mother's lips thinned. "Hannah is in no condition to return. Her breakdown was severe. The doctors said she needs time." And Julian Hoare asked, biting back bitterness. "He's literally brain dead, right? Or are we pretending now that this is some kind of fairy tale?" Her father stepped forward, softening. "Claire, we know this is insane. But legally, if the marriage contract is signed before Julian is removed as active co-director, the Monroe name stays on the project. You'd become his legal proxy. You'd have access. You'd protect everything your sister worked for, everything Hannah worked for. Not Claire. Never Claire. She had always been the afterthought, the one who didn't finish med school, who worked in clinics across the state like a nomad. No one asked what she wanted. So I become Mrs. Carter," Claire said quietly, "and inherit a dying research empire." "It's not dying," her mother said quickly. "It's unstable. But if you sign this marriage and step in as legal guardian of his assets and research, the Carter board will wait. They'll continue the funding. Everything stays afloat until what?" Claire's jaw clenched. "Until Julian dies and I walk away as a rich widow silence." That was the plan. Claire turned away from them, heart thudding. This wasn't just unethical. It was unthinkable. But as her eyes landed on the envelope with the word Carter Institute Urgent printed across it, her thoughts shifted. She had read about their work in passing. Experimental neural rewiring. A potential cure for degenerative memory diseases. If any of it was real, it could change lives. Lives like the patients she saw in rural clinics who had nothing but old prescriptions and broken insurance. "Will I be allowed access to the project?" she asked quietly. Her father blinked. What Claire turned to face him. "If I do this, if I marry Julian Carter, I want access to everything. Files, lab records, research data. I want to see what I'm supposedly protecting." He nodded slowly. "That can be arranged." Her mother exhaled, already pulling out a pen. "You'll be doing the right thing, Claire. For your family. For Hannah." Claire didn't answer. Her hand trembled slightly as she picked up the pen. Somewhere in the city, Julian Carter lay unconscious, his brain floating in silence. She didn't know him. She'd seen him once at a conference, tall and aloof in a tailored suit. He hadn't even looked her way. And now, she would become his wife. She signed her name, Claire Monroe Carter, and sealed a fate she couldn't begin to comprehend. Claire arrived at the Carter estate, under a slate-gray sky, her suitcase clutched tight in one hand and her breath fogging the air. The estate, nestled at the edge of the Roaring Fork River, looked more like a corporate headquarters than a home all glass walls, steel beams, and silent motion sensors. She was met at the door not by family, but by a security guard and a nurse with a digital clipboard. "Mrs. Carter," the nurse asked politely, though the title still made Claire flinch inside. "That's me," Claire replied. It didn't feel like her voice. The nurse led her through sterile corridors lined with abstract art and award plaques. Every corner of the house whispered of wealth, innovation, and secrets, a place built for brilliance, not intimacy. Eventually, they reached a private suite, Julian Carter's recovery wing. He was lying in a state-of-the-art hospital bed, surrounded by silent machines. His chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm. His face was calm, nearly untouched by the trauma, handsome even in that clinical way. His dark hair was tousled slightly on one side. Electrodes mapped the contours of his skull. A soft beeping counted out his stillness. "He's stable," the nurse said gently. "Minimal neurological activity, but not flatlined. That's why he hasn't been declared beyond recovery. We monitor him around the clock." Claire approached slowly, as if afraid to wake a ghost. She stood over the man who was now her husband, legally speaking, a man who might never open his eyes again, a man who was both patient and prisoner. "I'm not who you expected," she whispered, "but I guess you weren't expecting anyone." The nurse excused herself, and Claire was alone in the room, just her and the machines. She sat down in the chair beside the bed, her fingers locked together tightly. Outside, the wind picked up. The massive glass windows made her feel exposed, watched. She didn't know why she said it, but she leaned closer and murmured, "I didn't come here for the money. I came to see what the hell everyone's so desperate to protect." Julian didn't move, didn't flinch. Still, somehow it felt like he was listening. Later that night, the Carter Institute's main server room sat in the lower levels of the estate, locked behind biometric scanners. But Claire had been granted access, temporary for oversight, the lawyer had said. She scanned her retina and stepped inside. The hum of computers greeted her like a heartbeat. She sat down at a terminal and opened the shared research drive. Project Mirror was the label on the folders, the same project Julian and Hannah had pioneered. Claire clicked through data sets, neurological imaging treatment trials. The science was beyond anything she'd worked with. Targeted brain stimulation to resurrect long-term memories, regenerate synaptic pathways, even reverse selective amnesia. One folder was labeled, "Do not share. Phase 3. Locked. Encrypted." Claire's curiosity spiked. She returned upstairs, exhausted but wired. As she stepped into the living room, she nearly jumped. Someone was there, silhouetted in the moonlight. A tall woman stood by the window, glass of wine in hand. "Long day, Mrs. Carter?" she asked, turning with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Claire stiffened. "And you are Allegra Carter," the woman said smoothly. "Julian's cousin, COO of Carter Institute." "Of course. The gatekeeper, the legacy protector. I'm surprised they didn't brief you on me," Allegra continued, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor as she approached. "Then again, you weren't exactly the bride anyone expected." Claire said nothing. Allegra's gaze sharpened. "You're here for Hannah, for the grant money, for the stake in the Institute. It's all very noble." Claire met her eyes. "I'm here because you people made it impossible not to be." Allegra's smile flickered. "Just be careful where you dig, Claire. Not all experiments are meant to be revived." Claire didn't sleep that night. She lay in the guest wing, a modern box of chrome fixtures and clinical linens, but her mind kept replaying Allegra's final words. Not all experiments are meant to be revived. What did that even mean? Morning, the chill hadn't left her chest. She dressed in quiet haste and returned to Julian's room. The same stillness greeted her, the whir of machines, the pale light leaking through floor-to-ceiling glass. He looked like a statue carved from something soft and warm. She sat beside him as she had the day before and opened a book from the shelf, The Mind's Mirror, Neural Pathways and Personal Identity. It had Julian's name embossed on the cover. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she read. She wasn't sure why she kept doing this, maybe because it felt more human than anything else in this house, like speaking into a well and hoping something echoes back. Midway through a chapter on hippocampal rewiring, she paused. Something was different. She leaned forward. Julian's right hand had moved, just a fraction, a subtle twitch, a shift of muscle beneath the skin. Claire blinked, unsure. "Julian," she said quietly. "Nothing." She reached for his hand and wrapped her fingers gently around his. "If you can hear me, do it again." Silence. Beeping. The scent of antiseptic. She sat back, heart pounding. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe her sleep-deprived brain was playing tricks. Still, a cold sense of urgency unfurled inside her. She called the nurse. An hour later, Dr. Vernon Klein, Julian's longtime physician, arrived. He was tall, impeccably dressed, with a smile too practiced to feel sincere. "I heard he moved," Claire said. Dr. Klein smiled as he checked Julian's vitals. Comatose patients sometimes exhibit involuntary muscle contractions. It doesn't mean cognitive improvement, but we monitor everything. "There's been no change in his neurological activity," he said, then added with a raised brow. "Unless you've seen something in the reports." "I haven't," Claire flushed. She hated the way he said it. Like she was trespassing. "I want access to the Phase 3 trials," she said, voice calm. Dr. Klein straightened. "That data is confidential, even with your marriage. I'm legally his wife, and I'm listed as next of kin on the board papers." She handed him a printed copy. His smile faltered. She continued, voice cool. "I want everything sent to me by tonight. If you withhold anything, I'll make a formal inquiry to the ethics committee." A pause. Then reluctantly, "I'll see what I can do." That evening, Claire found the unlocked lab terminal in the study. The files had arrived just as she requested. Phase 1, cognitive mapping. Phase 2, stimulation via microcurrent injection. Phase 3, something new. As she scrolled through, her eyes froze on a title, Subject X, Memory Suppression Trials, authorized by H.M. Hannah Monroe. Claire's heart dropped. Her sister had authorized a suppression trial, not restoration. Was that even legal? She opened the file. It detailed a closed trial where patients were given a protein-enhancing compound designed not to repair the brain, but to intentionally block memory encoding. Temporary amnesia, a reset button, supposed to wear off in days, but on Julian's chart, one phrase was scrawled in red: adverse reaction, immediate collapse, seizure, prolonged coma. Claire's blood ran cold. Julian hadn't just had an accident. He had been a test subject for a therapy no one had ever approved. And her sister, the woman everyone claimed was recovering from a nervous breakdown, had signed off on it. Why would Hannah do that to the man she was about to marry down the hall? Claire approached Julian's room again, mind spinning with dread. But as she reached for the door, she froze. There were voices inside. 2 women. One was the nurse, the other Allegra. Claire leaned closer. "No, we're not adjusting the sedation," Allegra hissed. "I don't care if his fingers twitch. He doesn't wake up until I say so." "You said he might be improving," the nurse whispered. "If he gains consciousness, he could undo everything." Claire backed away before they noticed. Her stomach churned. Julian was waking up, and someone, maybe all of them, wanted to stop it. Claire barely slept. Again. By sunrise, she had replayed Allegra's words 100 times in her head. "He doesn't wake up until I say so." What did they mean to do? Medicate him into permanent unconsciousness, cut off life support? If he improved too much, Claire didn't know what was more horrifying, the lies or the calm with which they were spoken. She made herself coffee in the silent kitchen, her hands trembling slightly, then walked the long hallway toward Julian's room. When she entered, something was off. The rhythm of the machines had changed. Not an alarm, not urgent, but quieter, slower. She crossed the room in a few quick strides. Julian was still lying there, but his brow was furrowed like he was dreaming or struggling. Julian Claire leaned in pulse racing. His fingers twitched again, this time clearly. Then his head shifted a small jerk to the side. Her breath caught. "Julian. It's Claire. You're safe." Nothing. Then his eyelids fluttered. Once. Twice. And then he opened his eyes. Claire froze. Everything stopped, the air, her thoughts, even the mechanical beeping seemed distant. Julian's gaze moved slowly across the ceiling, disoriented. He blinked, then turned his head, finding her. "Who?" His voice was hoarse, barely audible. "Who are you?" She inhaled sharply. "I'm Claire," she said, stepping closer. "Your wife. Don't panic, you've been in a coma for months." He blinked again, clearly confused. "I don't remember anything." "It's okay," Claire said, trying to steady her voice. "That's expected. The doctors called it temporary memory suppression. You're safe now." But she wasn't sure that was true. Not at all. Later that day. Dr. Klein arrived 2 hours later, pale and tight-lipped. Claire stood beside the bed as the doctor conducted a battery of tests. Julian was alert, but weak. He answered basic questions. His long-term memory was gone completely. As Klein packed up his kit, Claire asked, "What now?" The doctor didn't answer at first. "Then we'll continue to monitor him. No media, no board meetings, no questions. Not until we understand what he's capable of recalling." Claire narrowed her eyes. "He's conscious. That's what matters. To you, maybe." Klein's eyes gleamed, then he turned and left. That night. Claire sat beside Julian in the quiet again. He looked so different, awake, still handsome, still composed, but unsure now. Vulnerable. "I've been reading to you every day," she said softly. "I don't know if it helped, but I didn't want you to be alone." Julian studied her. "You said we're married," she nodded. He gave a slow, tired smile. "You don't seem like someone who married a stranger for money, huh?" Claire's heart thudded. "That's because I didn't." There was a long pause. Then he asked, "Do you trust the people around me?" She looked him in the eyes. "No," she said quietly. "Not even a little." The confrontation. The next morning, Julian's recovery was already being downplayed. Klein released a brief internal memo calling it minimal responsiveness. Allegra never appeared, but Claire knew what she'd heard, what she'd read. She decided to act. She slipped into the Carter Institute server room again, downloaded the suppression trial logs, the lab access files, and the confirmation that Hannah, her own sister, had authorized the experimental injection just days before Julian's collapse. She brought it all to Julian. He read slowly, still groggy, but his hands tightened with each page. "They used me," he muttered. Claire hesitated. "There's more." She pulled out the security footage, the one she had quietly copied from the estate's archive. It showed Allegra and Klein entering Julian's private lab on the night of the accident. And Hannah, too. Julian stared at the screen. Why would she do this? "I don't know," Claire said, her voice breaking. "But I'm going to find out." He looked up at her. "No," he said. "We are." For the next 2 days, Claire and Julian worked quietly, carefully. They played the role of patient and caretaker, but behind the walls of his recovery suite they dug. Julian, though weak, was sharper than ever. Even without his memories, his mind was built for puzzles. "I know what to look for," he said. "I just need you to show me the cracks." Claire gave him everything: the medical logs, trial schematics, and the data she'd stolen from the Institute's encrypted backups. They worked at night, using a disconnected tablet Claire kept hidden in the lining of her jacket. By day, they said nothing. To Allegra, to Dr. Klein, to the staff who now tiptoed past Julian's door like he was radioactive. But the deeper they went, the more Claire's heart began to sink. Because all signs pointed back to one name: Hannah Monroe, Claire's older sister, the favorite, the visionary, the one everyone pitied after her exhaustion leave. Julian scrolled through a signed digital document, Hannah's login credentials authorizing Phase 3 for a single test subject, JC001. Him. "She risked my brain," Julian said, voice flat. "And I agreed to this." Claire couldn't answer. She didn't want to believe it either. But facts don't lie. "What if she didn't intend to hurt you?" she said, still clinging to hope. "What if it was sabotage? Maybe someone else pushed it too far." Julian looked at her quietly. "I remember her eyes," he said. "Just a flash, cold, focused, not fear, not love, just calculation." Later that evening, Claire couldn't sleep. She walked into the garden beneath the blue-gray hush of early nightfall. That's when she saw the figure waiting by the hedge. Hannah, her sister. She hadn't seen her in months. The woman who once dazzled scientific panels now looked worn, her skin pale, her smile brittle. "You look tired," Claire said cautiously. "So do you." Hannah stepped closer. "Married life not what you expected." Claire didn't smile. "What are you doing here?" Allegra told me. "Julian's awake. I needed to see it for myself." Claire's voice was tight. "Why?" "So you can see if the damage stuck." Hannah flinched slightly, then composed herself. "You don't understand what we were working on." "No," Claire snapped. "You don't understand what you did. You nearly erased a man. Someone you were about to marry." Hannah's voice lowered icy. He was about to pull funding from the project. He wanted to go public too early. The data wasn't ready. We would have been discredited. Everything I worked for would have collapsed. Claire's mouth opened, stunned. "So you..." "What? Sad used him as a test case without his consent. I had his signature," Hannah said, voice clipped. "He trusted me." Claire took a step back, disgusted. "You didn't just break ethics, Hannah. You broke him." "I did what I had to do." Hannah's eyes narrowed. "And so did you, right? You married him. Took my place." Don't pretend your hands are clean. Claire's breath caught. She didn't respond. Hannah leaned in close, her voice now a whisper. You think because he's waking up you've won. Let me tell you something, Claire. Julian only loves one thing, the work, and he'll leave you behind the moment he doesn't need you. Then she turned and disappeared into the shadows. Back inside, Claire sat in the dark by Julian's bed. He was asleep, his face calm, but his hand twitched in a way that reminded her he was still rebuilding, still fighting to exist. She looked at him and whispered, I don't care if you remember me. I just want you to have the chance to remember yourself. He stirred slightly in his sleep, and then just loud enough to make her breath stop, he murmured, Claire. The Carter Institute boardroom sat like a stage, floor-to-ceiling windows, spilling light over its sleek black table surrounded by powerful men and women in suits far too polished to admit fear. Julian Carter entered with slow but steady steps, a cane in one hand, Claire at his side. It was his first public appearance since the coma. The board had convened an emergency session. Officially, it was about reviewing leadership succession. Unofficially, everyone knew this meeting would expose everything. Allegra Carter sat at the head of the table, flanked by Dr. Klein and two executives Claire didn't recognize. Her smile was tight, rehearsed. Julian, what a surprise. We hadn't expected you so soon. Clearly, Julian said, voice dry. His posture was strong, but Claire could see the tension in the way his hand clenched the cane. He scanned the table. Before you moved to remove me from my own company, he said calmly, you should know I remember everything. A hush fell. Chairs shifted. Someone cleared their throat. Claire placed a folder on the table. Inside were security logs, digital signatures, encrypted communications, and the suppression trial file bearing Hannah Monroe's authorization. A second folder held audio recordings from Claire's room, Allegra's quiet threats, Klein's unethical orders to the staff. You authorized a black trial, Julian said coldly. You used me as a test subject. When I didn't die, you tried to keep me sedated. Klein opened his mouth, but Julian cut him off. And you're done talking. He turned to Allegra. You thought I wouldn't come back. You thought you could rewrite the project. Rewrite me. She smirked barely. You can't prove intent, Allegra said smoothly. It was your fiancé who authorized the drug. Your own name is on the waiver. At most, it's negligence. You'll never make it stick. Julian didn't flinch. You're right, but I don't need a courtroom to remove you. He looked to the rest of the board. I have proof. I have my memory. And as of today, I have regained full executive control of Carter Institute. Silence. Then someone from legal cleared their throat. Mr. Carter's designation as medical proxy and majority vote share was temporarily suspended due to incapacitation. If he is now certified as recovered, Claire handed over the doctor's signed clearance. She had made sure of that the night before. The lawyer nodded slowly. Then all current interim powers, including Ms. Allegra Carter's, are hereby revoked. Allegra's smile finally broke. You're making a mistake. No, Julian said. You made it. He turned to the board. You have two choices. Follow me into the future or bury this institute in scandal. No one spoke. And then slowly a majority of hands were raised in support of Julian. Aftermath, Allegra and Dr. Klein were removed from the premises within the hour. Legal proceedings would follow. But it was Hannah who haunted Claire most. She hadn't shown up, hadn't answered calls, hadn't responded when Julian had sent a final one-sentence message, I remember what you did. I remember who I trusted. And it wasn't you. Claire stood with Julian in the garden that night, under the early fall sky. You didn't have to fight for me, he said quietly. Claire looked at him, the ache still soft in her chest. You didn't remember me. I could have walked away and it would have been easier. But I didn't. Because even when you didn't know me, I knew you deserved better. He reached out, fingers gently curling into hers. I remember you now, he whispered. Not from before, but from after. From the moment I opened my eyes and you were there. Her breath caught. He stepped closer. And I remember how you didn't ask for any of this. But you stayed anyway. Claire's voice trembled. I didn't just stay. I fell in love with you. Julian leaned in, not rushed, not dramatic, just honest. So let's do it right this time, he said. She smiled, eyes glassy. No coma, she whispered. No contracts, he replied. Just the two of them rebuilding from truth, not obligation. 6 months later. The Carter Institute had changed. The building still gleamed with its signature glass and steel elegance, but beneath the surface a quiet transformation had taken root. New ethics protocols, transparent oversight, independent review panels. Julian Carter wasn't just the CEO now. He was the face of scientific redemption, a man who came back from the edge both medically and morally. But that wasn't the part Claire cared about. Because 6 months after that first impossible wedding, the one she'd signed in panic, fear, and duty, she stood barefoot in a sun-drenched meadow above Aspen, wearing a simple linen dress, holding a bouquet of wildflowers she'd picked herself. Her hair was loose in the wind. Her heart was light. This time there were no reporters, no contracts, no glass towers watching her like judgmental gods. Only Julian. He stood barefoot too, in rolled sleeves and a quiet grin, looking at her like he'd never been broken. And when he took her hands, his voice was soft but unshakably clear. I remember the woman who read to me when I was lost, who held my hand before I knew her name, who never stopped fighting even when everyone told her to let go. Claire's throat tightened. And I remember she said, blinking through tears, that you never asked me to prove anything. You just saw me. They said no vows. They didn't need to. The silence between them was sacred. He kissed her under the open sky. There were no witnesses, no papers, just them. 1 year later, Julian's recovery was now studied in medical journals. The neurotherapy program was repurposed, no more risky shortcuts, no more black trials. Instead, it focused on healing, not forgetting. Claire now co-directed a new patient advocacy division, ensuring that no one was ever treated as expendable again. She still read aloud every morning, not to a comatose stranger, but to her husband, who listened now fully awake, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying with her. They had taken what began as a forced arrangement and turned it into something real, something rooted in truth and time. And sometimes, late at night, Julian would whisper, "You were never supposed to be part of this world, Claire, but you became the best thing in it." She would smile and whisper back, "That's because I stopped waiting to be chosen. I chose myself first." This wasn't the life Claire had planned, but it was finally hers. Not borrowed, not inherited, not stolen. Hers.